Who's your commander?
Good luck.
Equip.
Move to combat.
Resolves.
Now, before you attack
Does
me,
anyone have an answer?
well played.
Good game.
Hello everyone, DJ here with the Jumbo Commander YouTube channel. Today I want to talk about budget. I've noticed that a lot of our commander staples have just kind of like gone out of budget. It used to be you could drop a quarter and get a commander staple, but it seems like we're having to spend more and more money for our cards these days. That's why I think it's super important to pay attention to the cards that you can get that are truly inexpensive. That's why I've put together a commander staples list. This is 100 cards that are all very playable in our format, and together you can get them for around $25. The most expensive card on this list is just under 50 cents, and some of them get as cheap as a couple of pennies. Now, because I'm covering 100 cards, I'm going to be doing very, very fast descriptions of the card. If you are interested in learning exactly why some of these cards are more powerful, I'm going to be releasing a second follow-up video where I'm going to be reading the cards, explaining exactly what their pros and cons are. And if you find that you're a new player or just want to see how card evaluation works a little bit more, you might want to tune into that much more long-form video. But for right now, I'm going to blaze through 100 cards that you can get for just $25. Let's build your commander collection. Bounty Agent is a bear that can answer legendary artifacts, creatures, or enchantments, and you know your opponents are going to have legendary creatures. There's a lot of removal in white, and so you're gonna want the body if you want Bounty Agent. Hushwing Griff can definitely interrupt your opponent's game plan because many commander decks rely on creatures entering the battlefield and causing those powerful triggers. Being able to disrupt that can disrupt entire decks. Angel of Sanctions is a great piece of removal that can hit any non-land permanent. Usually having your removal on a body is a little bit suspect because it's prone to removal, but I find that the Embalm effect on Angel of Sanctions more than makes up for this shortcoming. World Queller is a symmetrical effect that has everyone sacrificing a certain permanent type, but you can make sure to break the symmetry. If you have no planeswalkers, because they're expensive, you can literally name planeswalkers every time and no one can keep one on the board. White is also pretty good at dumping out little puny creatures, so you can make sure to sacrifice your small creatures and hopefully nab a few big creatures from your opponents. This is a very powerful effect. A Darkar Valkyrie is an angel. I really like that it has vigilance because its activated ability can save another creature. And protection in white can be very valuable, as long as some corner case scenarios of rebuying enter the battlefield effects. Harmonious Archon is a big beater. This has 10 power and 11 toughness across 3 bodies. It also really levels the playing field in many decks. This makes all non-arcane creatures 3/3s. This can really change the dynamic of a board state, making some creatures bigger, but many of them smaller. And hopefully in white, you can take advantage of this powerful effect. Let's take a look at a piece of equipment, Mace of the Valiant. Usually equipment costs a little bit too much money to make it onto lists like these, so it's nice to find something that has a powerful effect, but also doesn't hurt our budget. Mace of the Valiant is very slow, to be fair, but in the late game, if you cast lots and lots of creatures, you can have a mace that equips and really pumps up your creature more than you'd expect. Parhelion 2 is very clunky at 8 mana for this legendary artifact vehicle, but at this price point, I really like to pay attention to cards that can close out a game, because usually these big, powerful, impactful cards cost more money. And honestly, if I were upgrading my collection from a budget collection to maybe like a mid-range collection, I might be replacing Parhelion 2 before a lot of these other white cards. Parhelion 2 is quite clunky, but it does have a powerful effect, producing 2 4/4 white angel creature tokens with flying and vigilance that are attacking. Yeah, that's a pretty powerful effect. But you know, Sacred Mesa could also take over a game. 1 in a white, put a 1/1 white Pegasus creature token with flying onto the battlefield. With enough mana, this can overwhelm your opponents, and hopefully you have a use for little 1/1s. Maybe you can sacrifice them to a World Queller, or make them 3/3s with an Archon, or equip them with a Mace, or maybe use Commander's Insignia. There are a lot of anthems available at this price point, but I feel like Commander's Insignia, although having a lot of hoops to jump through, has the highest upside. 2 white, your creatures get +1/+1 for each time you've cast your commander from the command zone this game. Yes, this anthem is clunky and could theoretically buff your team by nothing, but is the only enchantment anthem that really scales with the game. If you play this, on turn 13, this could be granting +3/+3 or +4/+4, which is what you might need at that point in time. Now let's talk about the most powerful budget enchantment that I can find. It's Martyrs Bond. For white for an enchantment, whenever Martyrs Bond or another non-land permanent you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices a permanent that shares a card type with it. Grave Pact and Dictate of Erebos are very powerful effects in black. This simulates that same effect in white, but it also applies to planeswalkers, artifacts, enchantments, and creatures. Sacrifice a Mind Stone to draw a card, suddenly everyone's sacrificing artifacts. Tick down a planeswalker to get good value, and suddenly everyone else has to sacrifice planeswalkers. Not to mention these silly little Pegasuses that can be thrown away, and then suddenly you're wiping your opponent's boards. This is an incredibly powerful enchantment. You should probably go buy one right now. Moving on, Ephemerate. This is even seeing play in more competitive formats. Spellseeker will get Ephemerate, blink my Spellseeker, get what I really want, and then blink it again next turn. Rebuying ETBs is good, and 2-for-1s on a card is great. Speaking of 2-for-1s, Brought Back brings back 2 things. This is really strong in white. White sometimes struggles to ramp, so you get that fetch land or that Wayfarer's Bauble back just so you can ramp a little bit more. White also struggles with committing too much to the board. Suddenly some things die and you can bring them back. This is protection against removal, protection against board wipes. It can synergize with your own sacrifice outlets. It's a very strong card. Crush Contraband. We need answers for artifacts and enchantments. This answers one of each. Again, 2-for-1 on a single card, and it doesn't hurt that it exiles them as well. Now let's talk about some blue cards. Loyal Drake is a little flyer, and it seems like it might not draw you a card every turn, but if it does, it turns out to be really strong. Archaeomancer gets stuff back from your graveyard for a pretty good price. Whirler Rogue. This is 4 power and 4 toughness across 3 bodies for 4 mana, 2 of it's flying, and by the way, it can give something unblockable. It just seems to do everything. Wonder. If this ends up in your graveyard, you're going to wonder how you can't win the game, because it's going to give your whole team flying, and your opponent's going to have no answers for flying big dudes. Ixodron is the only board wipe that can actually answer some of the creatures out there in Commander. It just flips everything upside down. 2/2s are relevant, and these are not manifests, so your opponent can't flip them back up again, and so oftentimes this will strand commanders on the battlefield. Very rarely do we have permanent answers for Commander at this price point. This card is amazing. Thrix, the Sudden Storm is pretty new. Flash, flying 4/5, it's really great, but what you really care about is that, well, your big spells cost 1 less and they can't be countered. Deep Fathom Skulker. It's a Coastal Piracy or Bident of Thassa on a creature. Whenever a creature deals damage to a player, you may draw a card. That means if you have an army of dudes, you could be drawing a lot of cards. This activated ability of also making sure creatures can't be blocked is very strong. You could sometimes get a big creature through and win the game. Sphinx of Athun. It's a flying 5/6 that factor fictions. Yeah, that's really good. In fact, we're going to be talking about factor fiction in a little bit. Omen of the Sea is a pretty okay cantrip. You'd usually like these to be costing 1 CMC, like Ponder or Preordain. Did you know that Preordain costs $4 right now? Yeah, no thank you. Omen of the Sea does the same thing, except for it might have a little bit of upside, even though it costs 1 more. Midnight Clock scared a lot of people because it feels very unreliable, but honestly at its core, it's just a mana rock when you need it. Mana rocks are great, and we will play it. And then, pretty soon, it can turn into a draw 7. You know, if you have a couple cards in your hand that you kind of liked, I'm pretty sure that trading those in for a fresh 7 is still very, very good. You should be playing Midnight Clock in a lot more decks. You know, I'm not really a fan of boring old control magic, but when your enchanted creature has Infect and can suddenly threaten lethal at your opponent, giving creatures Infect that weren't meant to have Infect is a great way to end the game quickly. Future Sight is incredibly powerful, mostly because you can play lands off the top of your library. I've often drawn 2 or 3 or 4 cards off of Future Sight in a single turn. This card also has some great synergy with some more expensive cards out there. The Mari Conjecture can get cards back, it can double up, it basically does everything for very cheap. There is this very narrow timing window where you have to do everything, which kind of stinks because people can hold on to their counter magic. Let's talk about the best card draw spell out there. That's Fact or Fiction. You can reveal the top 5 cards of your library and you get to pick the opponent and how they separate it. There's a lot of politics. It's a fun card. Sometimes they'll give you 5 cards in one pile and 0 cards in the other. That means you paid 4 mana to draw 5. This is just awesome. And Sphinx of Athun is pretty good too, which is Fact or Fiction on a dude. Diminishing Returns is a draw 7, but wait a second, I thought draw 7s were too expensive for me to afford. Well, it's underplayed because Diminishing Returns doesn't work well in combo decks because you have to exile the top 10 cards of your library. But if you're just playing a value deck, then this could be a really solid draw 7 for you. Treasure Cruise, draw 3 cards, Delve is powerful, it's great. You know, normal counterspell is actually pretty expensive, so are a lot of counterspells, and I'm not going to be suggesting you play cards like Cancel, so Disdainful Stroke is pretty good. It's easy to cast, and it counters the most relevant cards in our format. Whelming Wave. Everyone looks at Whelming Wave and says, oh, am I playing Krakens, Leviathans, Octopuses, and Serpents? Doesn't matter. Just bouncing everything, even if it's bouncing your own stuff, is really good, and if you happen to have an Octopus on the battlefield, then that's pretty good too. Black cards. Isareth the Awakener lets you cast things from your graveyard. Loyal Subordinate is a zombie that can sometimes have some synergies, but most importantly, if you have your commander, it just does a lot of damage. This could just do 9 every single turn without even attacking. It's great. Plague Crafter is a pretty common edict effect, but I really like that it hits planeswalkers, and when people don't have anything on the battlefield, you can attack their hand. Sir Conrad has proven himself to be very, very good and doesn't even need some combo around him. You can just activate the ability and drain your opponents. It's also super funny against graveyard decks. Massacre Girl is a board wipe on a body. Kothafed will draw you so many cards, it might actually kill you. Newscraft Mob is the budget Grave Titan. For 6 mana, you will eventually end up with 10 power and toughness across 5 zombie bodies. Torgar, Famine Incarnate, will just set your opponent's life total to 10. That is a very powerful effect, especially when you have a 7/6 on the battlefield. Underworld Connections is a discount Phyrexian Arena. You just have to sacrifice that land in order to draw that card. The Eldest Reborn does everything. It's an edict effect, it's a discard effect, and you get a creature back, all for 5 mana. I know it's a little bit slow, but it's been particularly powerful. Hedonist Trove. This is another big splashy effect. 7 CMC. When it enters the battlefield, you basically get to play cards from your opponent's graveyard. It's almost like a Black Praetor's Council. It's a little bit clunky, but it's surprisingly good. Ransack the Lab is cheap black card draw. Look at the top 3, grab 1, put the others into your graveyard. Read the Bones is cheap black card draw. 3 mana, scry 2, draw 2, lose 2. Now let's talk about some big splashy effects in black. Command the Dread Horde pushes the budget to 49 cents at the time of recording, the most expensive card on this list, but it is worth it. 6 mana, you get to pay life and bring back creatures and planeswalkers. This could be a 6 mana Rise of the Dark Realms. It does an imitation of a $20 card. It's very strong, and sometimes you don't even want every creature, you just want to pick and choose exactly what you need to win the game. Ghastly Conscription. Exile all cards from target player's graveyard in a face-down pile, shuffle that pile, then manifest those cards. So this creates a huge army of 2/2s, and sometimes you can flip them up to gain control of the creature's real power. Ghastly Conscription is another one of those budget finishers that you might find yourself replacing with something better sooner than some of the other staples that I've mentioned earlier. Let's move on to red. Gutter Snipe can do a lot of damage, and all you gotta do is play your cards. If no one answers your Krenko Tinscreet Kingpin, then you're gonna end up with a lot of goblins and a Krenko that can attack into anyone's board. Wildfire Devils is random, which scares a lot of people, but this gives you value from your opponent's graveyards over and over and over again. Next, we have the creature that inspired this video. I tweeted about Tectonic Giant and how great it is for the price, and honestly, I can't get over it. 4 mana for a 3/4, and when it attacks or becomes the target of a spell an opponent controls, that's crazy. It can either deal 3 damage to each opponent. In Commander, that could just be dealing 9, that's great. Or you can exile the top 2 cards of your library. You can choose one of them. Until the end of your next turn, you may play that card. That means you can play lands, you can play spells, you can set up your next turn. This is card draw in red, this is huge amounts of damage. The body's just fine too. It's amazing, and it's very inexpensive. Warmonger Hellkite is a great big dragon. It accelerates the game by making everyone attack, but more importantly, this is a huge anthem for your team. 1 and a red to give all attacking creatures +1/+0 until end of turn. That's an effect that ends games, and it's also nice because you can activate it on your opponent's turns as well. Tectonic Giant might break the social contract by attacking lands, but it is amazing. 7 mana for an 8/5 haste just comes out of nowhere. Whenever it attacks, each player who controls the most lands sacrifices 2 lands. You don't even have to attack that player. You don't have to make contact, just immediately taxing that green player for ramping way too much. People didn't give Wizards enough credit for this card. Wizards, this is a good design. Good job. Keep pushing this envelope. I'm really impressed. Tectonic Reformation, turn your excess lands into redraws. Thrill of Possibility, it's instant speed, discard a card, draw 2. Ignite the Future. This exiles the top 3 cards. You have to use them until your next turn, but hopefully you can plan out your turns pretty well. You can also play those cards, which means you can hit lands off of this impulse draw. The flashback cost is also interesting because I love not paying mana for things. I was surprised at how inexpensive Increasing Vengeance is, because copy effects are usually pretty expensive. This lets you copy an instant or sorcery spell you control and flash it back, allowing you to copy it more than once. The thing that stinks is that this is only spells you control, so you can't go copying your opponent's ramp spell or your blue opponent's draw spell. Release the Gremlins can destroy a lot of artifacts and give you little cute gremlin creature tokens. If you want to pay double this, which is still around 25 cents, you can get By Force, which just destroys artifacts. I think that might be better if you're trying to be a little bit more aggressive or competitive, and this would be better in the majority of budget commander decks, because gremlins are still gremlins. Reality Scramble can turn your gremlin into something better. It can upgrade your planeswalker, your artifact. It's actually very fun, especially with that retrace, constantly allowing you to look through your deck to try to find something better than you already have. Green. One of the only tutors on this list is Fierce Empath. This is still pushing the budget of close to 40 cents, but it really does come in handy. It lets you get a creature card with converted mana cost 6 or more, and in green that could be some of your big beaters. Springbloom Druid is a really strong ramp spell on a dude. You want these in your deck. Voice of Many was overlooked in the most recent commander set. It's a 4 mana 3/3, but when it enters the battlefield, draw a card for each opponent who controls fewer creatures than you. This often will draw you 3 creatures in a green deck. I often have more creatures than my opponents, and so Voice of Many, although not reliable, can be very, very strong. Arasta of the Endless Web is a powerful spider that makes you more spiders. In my experience, your opponents are going to cast their instants or sorceries anyways. Because of cards like Mystic Remora, I'm constantly drawing cards off of that. They will just play their spells and you'll just keep making 1/2 spiders, and this will gain a ton of value. You're going to look back on this card and notice that it does a lot of heavy lifting. Acidic Slime is a great 2-for-1 card. It destroys target artifact, enchantment, or land, and the fact that it has Death Touch means that it's going to trade away for something better later on in the game. Deep Forest Hermit puts a ton of power and toughness onto the battlefield. Even though that 9 power across 5 bodies for just 5 mana isn't going to last forever, the fact that it's there at all is very good. Aggressive Mammoth is 6 mana for an 8/8. Those stats are very good, but it also gives all your creatures trample. In green, there's sometimes really big creatures that don't have ways of getting through, and so Aggressive Mammoth can combine really nicely with them. Verdant Force can just create an army, and in multiplayer, you're going to be getting a Saproling at the beginning of each upkeep, going really, really wide. Endray's Forerunners does a pretty poor impersonation of Craterhoof Behemoth, but it is still very good and often good enough to win games. Winding Way is simple. It gets you what you need, lands or creatures, and oftentimes it can get you more than one. Krosan Tusker is the green divination. You can cycle it and you can get a card and a land. And in the worst case scenario, you got a 6/5. That's not so bad either. Once in Future is the regrowth effect that I've chosen. Normal regrowth is pretty inexpensive as well, so you can pick that up, but I really like paying a lot of green and 4 mana to just get 2 cards back. Fertile Ground and Wolf Willow Haven is just good. We should be embracing this 2 mana aura-based ramp. Green has recently given us a powerful removal spell with Kenrith's Transformation. 3/3s are inconsequential, and the fact that you draw a card from this entering the battlefield is amazing. Frontier Siege does just give you a ton of mana if you choose cons. It's 2 green mana at the beginning of each of your main phases. That could be giving you 4 green mana every turn to use. Dragons fighting things is fine too. Now I know multicolored spells are a little bit more narrow, but all of these will be great additions to your collection. Zertra Druid is a mana ramping dude that can do a surprising amount of damage. Just tap it and suddenly it does 3 damage and adds mana. Amazing. Judith the Scourge Diva can pump your team, but then also deal incidental damage all around the battlefield. Wonderful in go wide strategies. Sortev can get your creatures back, but also it's just really aggressively costed. 4 CMC for a 5/4 trample with recursion built in. Yeah, it's really good. Next, when I think of Dimir, I'm not thinking of big beaters, but I have to say that Duskmantle Seer is one of them. It's a 4/4 flyer for 4 CMC, and at the beginning of your upkeep, each player reveals the top card of their library, and then they lose life, equal to that card's converted mana cost, and draws it. Yes, you're creating a Howling Mine, but when you have an aggressive deck, just doming your opponents for their big dirtily spells while you're attacking really aggressively, oh my gosh. Duskmantle Seer is a very strong card in the right deck. Garna the Blood Flame is amazing, and I'm surprised it's so cheap. 5 CMC for a flashy, hasty, amazing warrior. And when it enters the battlefield, you just get to rebuy all of those creature cards that ended up in your graveyard. Did you discard them for some reason to some effect? Did they die? It doesn't matter how they ended up in the graveyard. You flashy this in, get it back, everything's fast. Cloud Blazer is really solid because you draw cards and gain life. Theater of Horrors is recursive card draw for just 3 mana. Golgari Charm can answer a board of tiny creatures, it can destroy a problematic enchantment, but most importantly, it can save your team from destruction. Regenerate each creature you control. Suddenly that board wipe isn't as intimidating as it used to be. And Death Sprout. This is removal that ramps, it's exactly what you want in Commander. Whispering Madness is a windfall for 1 extra mana, but it gives us this interesting cipher effect, so we can keep windfalling every single turn. Urban Evolution is an Explorer tacked onto a Divination. Those are 2 cards that we really want in this format. Migratory Route demonstrates the flexibility that we want in Commander cards. Yes, we can put 4 little birds onto the battlefield, but also it has basic land cycling. So when we need this to be a land, it can become a land. Land drops are important, and so making sure you have the ability to hit them is very good. And then we have Find Finality, get cards back, but also this is a limited board wipe if you really need that effect. And then finally we have 2 cards in 3 colors because I particularly like them. Sekuar Death Keeper can turn all of your dying creatures into 3/1 tokens with haste. This is an excellent commander, and even when it's not built around, these 3/1s can be super aggressive and win games. And then finally we have one of my favorite 3-color cards, and it's Brutal Horde Chief. Whenever a creature you control attacks, the defending player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. That drain is particularly powerful, but most importantly, this activated ability, 3 Boros, you just get to choose how things block. It's so good. You can just create the worst blocks possible, let things get through for damage, keep everything exactly like you want it. It's a powerful effect. Just a few artifacts left of this video. Crashing Drawbridge. Giving haste is very important. Green will even play expensive symmetrical effects like Concordant Crossroads just to get haste, and now we have a discount version that can go in any deck. Treasure Keeper seems like a clunky hill giant, but being able to rebuy another creature when this dies means that we have a built-in 2-for-1, and that seems to be the theme of Commander. Meteor Golem is a dude that kills a thing. Mere Battlesphere is also pushing the top end of the budget, but it can just kill someone out of nowhere, and leaving mirrors behind even if it eats removal is still strong. Artisan of Kozilek is a 2-for-1 on an Eldrazi, and Annihilator 2 is still Annihilator. Bag of Holding is a little bit clunky, but it is still card draw, and this can go in a lot of decks that have a problem with card draw. Crystal Ball is another form of card selection. If you feel like you want a Sensei's Divining Top, then maybe you really want a Crystal Ball. Next, I'm not quite sure if I like Heraldic Banner or Midnight Clock the most of my 3 mana rocks. Heraldic Banner is 3 mana, make some mana, but most importantly, you get to pump your team. A lot of anthems cost 3 mana anyways, so the fact that this could also ramp me is amazing. And finally, we have 2 pretty unique effects on a budget. Oracle's Vault. Eventually, this just has you playing cards off the top of your deck for free. That's an insanely expensive effect that we're able to get on a budget. And then finally, we have Aeon Engine. This can approximate an extra turn for 5 colorless mana and just sense in your commander collection. This card is going to play out so much better than you think. You're going to take your turn, and then your opponent's going to take their turn, and then you're going to take a turn again. When we're talking about a 4-player game, Aeon Engine gives you a whole extra turn before everyone else. I know this isn't exactly like take an extra turn, but it's going to play better with your play group. It's still going to feel like an extra turn, and it's actually going to equalize the game a little bit better because the players that go first actually have a pretty strong advantage. And so if you can manipulate it so that they actually get to go last as you reverse the turn order, then maybe you've provided a little bit more equality to the game. Yeah, this is one of the most powerful effects for the cheapest price. Thank you so much for joining me. I know it was a whirlwind of cards. Hopefully you find a few of them that you like. Remember, this totals to be $25, but when you factor in tax and shipping and maybe the prices at your local game store, it might not actually end up being $25. But where this could be really good is, let's say you're buying a staple that you need, but maybe you haven't reached the minimum shipping threshold. Damn you, minimum shipping threshold! Keep this list in mind, add a few cards from it. You know, have it fill out your commander collection, trade for these, find them in bulk. You know, these are some solid cards that you can use to build your commander repertoire, to build new decks, and to experiment. So grab onto these cards and be creative. Thank you so much for watching this video. I want to thank Cool Stuff Inc. because they sponsor videos like this in the Jumbo Commander YouTube channel. If you want to pick up some of these cards, go ahead and click on the link in the description and that'll take you over to their website. And if you use the coupon code JUMBO5, you'll get 5% off your order. I also want to thank my patrons that support me all the time through every video and everything that I do. Thank you, patrons. And thank you for watching. All right, everyone, remember, if you are interested in the long form discussion of this video, go ahead and take a look out for that video coming out really shortly. Coming out shortly. Bye.